Hey, so I am now on the line with a Miss Mimi Mariposa, who
Yay.
is from Nashville, Tennessee. You are currently a Brazilian Zouk dancer, instructor, organizer for the past 7 or so years, we'll say.
It's been a while.
You have a background in ballroom as well as Latin dance. Is that correct?
Yes,
Hey,
that is.
how are you doing today, Miss Mimi?
I'm doing great. I got my coffee.
Hey,
It's my morning. It's your evening. So it's
it
good.
is. Exactly. Um, how I normally start these out, I would love to hear about your childhood growing up in Nashville, Tennessee. Could you please tell me about that?
Yeah. So I have pretty fond memories of growing up. So I was very much like a tomboy. And so I grew up on 5 acres, like out. So I say I'm from Nashville, but there's always this caveat of like, you say Nashville because no one else can find anything, because no one can find anything else on the map, right? So I'm really from the suburbs, which I think here people like, and here being Virginia, kind of closer to DC, people would consider it the country. Like our neighbors had horses and like the streets didn't have like street lights like when you got towards my house. So like I grew up 30 minutes outside of Nashville and we grew up on about 5 acres and there was like woods. And so we would go, um, out exploring and climbing trees and just a very outdoors experience. And I loved it. And I have two brothers. And so we're all pretty close in age. And so we'd get into all sorts of mess. But it was fun. And yeah, I grew up out there and I stayed there until about 5, 6 years ago. Well, yeah, 5 or 6 years ago now. And then I moved to the Virginia area for work.
I'm curious. Tell me, what were some of your favorite childhood hobbies? What did you enjoy doing?
Um, so I was big into sports. So I really loved playing like basketball and lacrosse and soccer and all those fun things. I also love to swim. I still to this day love to swim. Horseback riding. I was also like, and still am a super nerd. So like loved to read. Like I remember like we would go to like stores and I'd beg my parents to buy me books and they were like, how can we say no to a book? Like, like that's just not even fair. But that's what I wanted. I read avidly. Um, so yeah, I had a lot of interest, I guess, actually. I also acted. I was in play like school plays and things like that. So I just liked to dabble in everything. That was kind of my thing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm
Yeah,
very
thanks.
curious to know. Tell me how important was music in your
Mm.
household growing up?
Yeah, so music was big. So my brother's actually a music major and majored in trumpet. So, and then I was a percussionist and I was in marching band and concert band and all sorts of stuff like that. And so um, my parents aren't musicians, but I mean, they love music. So, music was always on in the house. Like, I mean, my mom would be in the kitchen, like cleaning or cooking or, whatever. That was like a very central place in the house. Always had music on. We would always dance around. And so it was always, I have very fond memories of that. And I think they were both very encouraging of us to explore the arts. And I think having that background in percussion and also having like a very musical brother was really helpful because I learned the music, the foundations of music and kind of music theory early. And that really helped in my dance later. And it's something that I realize not everyone has experienced. So I feel very fortunate, but it was definitely, I had a lot of fun. Like I competed on a drum line all the way through college. So yeah, it was super fun. But music has a very special place in my heart.
Okay, and so tell me this real quick. What take it back to young Mimi. What did
Yes.
young Mimi want to be when she grew up? What was her goals, her ambition?
Mm. I mean, I really wanted to be Princess Leia, let's be honest. A princess, like very, but I wanted to be a galactic space princess with a pistol. That's what I wanted to be, or a Jedi. Um, yeah, it's so funny growing up. All I can remember about like whenever people would be like, "What do you want to be?" I always had a different answer. So there for a while, I wanted to be, actually for a good chunk of time, I wanted to be a, what is it called? An archaeologist, like an Egyptian archaeologist, like specializing in Egypt. So I had a bunch of like books on Egypt and like hieroglyphs and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, it really changed a lot. Although I did end up doing archaeology in my undergrad. So that's my undergraduate degrees in anthropology and archaeology. So I guess, I did baby Mimi proud. But I did not stick in that career. But yeah, I do remember that one sticking around for quite a while. I really liked like ancient cultures and languages and things like that. Like I find culture very fascinating. So.
And so where did you go for your undergrad? What school?
Middle Tennessee State University, MTSU. Yeah, so I went to MTSU. It's about 30 minutes south of Nashville.
And is that when you were first introduced to social dancing, or when did that come about?
It was, yeah. So I had taken some dance classes and stuff as a kid, and everyone's always like, "Oh, did you start dancing when you were a child?" And I'm like, I mean, technically, yes, but like I didn't stick with it. So I don't feel like I can say like, "Oh, I've been dancing forever." But I definitely took ballet and tap and stuff when I was littler and gymnastics. But it wasn't until undergrad that I really got introduced to like the partner dancing world. So I was taking a ballet class, and which is really great. I highly recommend ballet for everybody. It'll whip you into shape. But it was fun, and I enjoyed it. But there was a salsa, there was a partner dancing class that I decided to take with a former boyfriend, and we fought our whole way through it, as couples can do. But we both fell in love with dancing. So after we broke up after the class, we both went to separate dance clubs. So he went to the swing dance club and I went to the salsa club. And that has forever shaped the rest of my dance career. But yeah, I joined the salsa club, and I think it was one of the first meetings I went to. The head of the salsa club, his name was Justin. We're still good friends today. He was like, "Hey, there's not like many people here. Do you want to try Zouk?" And I was like, "Okay, sure. I've never heard of that." And he taught me my first steps of Zouk, and I hated it. And I was like, "Ooh, I don't like this. This is not for me." Because he tried to do like some head motion kind of stuff, and I was like, "Oh, I'll stick with salsa, thanks." And bachata, I just discovered bachata and was like, that was my love. But we started dating. And so his favorite dance was Zouk. And so he was like, "Okay, well, I'm going to go do the Zouk stuff. I know you don't like it, so you don't have to come." And of course, me being like, wanting to go with him and do stuff with him, I was like, I guess I could go. Like, I could go if it's a Zouk thing. That's fine. So then through further exposure and getting better at the dance, I fell in love with it. And I was like, oh, this is good. Now that I actually know some basics and like got to know the dance a little bit better, that was really helpful. So so really MTSU Salsa Club, that's where I started.
So real quick, I want to kind of get this timeline down. So you start with salsa and some bachata. How long did you dance salsa and bachata then?
I mean, I guess technically I never stopped
okay.
really, but I guess I didn't. So I was really focusing on salsa and bachata and ballroom earlier on in college. And I'd been introduced to Zouk and I liked it, especially since like me and Justin were dating at that time. But salsa and bachata and ballroom were my main focuses. So I was going like salsa and bachata dancing every night kind of thing. Once I got out of college, I really went more into the ballroom realm, and mostly because that's where you can get trained and like they have studios everywhere and they'll teach you how to teach and like you can get a job there. So that's why I went the ballroom route, but I was still known as like the salsa person or the salsa bachata person. And like to some degree Zouk. So it was several years before I really focused on Zouk hardcore as like, I'm going to teach Zouk. Stop asking me to teach other things. Just because Zouk is so niche, even though it's my favorite and I'm super passionate about it and have for most of my dance career, it was never something that I could make a career off of, or was willing to make the necessary sacrifices to make a career out of it. So I thought, oh, if I go the ballroom route, then I can make a career off dancing, teaching dance, and also do Zouk like in that realm. And that never really quite worked out. So that was a spoiler for the future. That never worked out.
So real quick, okay, I definitely understand that. Tell me this then.
Yeah.
I want to hear about your beginner stage in salsa, bachata, as well as Brazilian Zouk. So let's just start with salsa and bachata. Tell me about your beginner stage in that.
Yeah. So I took that partner dancing class, and it was, the way it was structured is it was like, an elective class for one semester.
Uh-huh.
And they basically, the whole point was to introduce you to as many dances as they could. So I think throughout the semester, we got introduced to like 5 or 6 kinds of dance.
Uh-huh.
And I remember the teacher refused to teach us bachata because it was too sensual. So I remember that was my first time ever hearing of bachata, and was like, oh, it's sensual. Ooh, like a little bit like, oh, we can't do that. Scandalous. But we did some like hustle and swing dancing and salsa, and like I'm sure there were other dances that I literally cannot remember at this point. But yeah, so that was kind of a very introductory class. I really came out of it thinking like, wow, I know a lot, but I did not. And so when I joined the salsa club, that was a little bit of a chunk of time later, after my former boyfriend and I had split. So I was, I guess, kind of like dancing with him at that point. And I thought like, wow, we're so good at swing. And we really liked swing as a couple. And so when that ended, I was like, I really liked that salsa. Let me go join that salsa club. One, because I still wanted to be able to dance. And obviously I didn't have my partner anymore. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I'll go find other people. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really, I guess I would describe it as stumbling into salsa, really, from swing dance. And I remember being super conservative in my movements. Like I didn't want to make big movements. And I remember Justin specifically, he was teaching me salsa, and I forget what we were doing, but he was like, okay, I'm going to need you to stick your arm out. And I was like, okay. And I was like, and he was like, no, Mimi, I need you to stick it all the way out. And I was like, what do you mean? And so he like pulled my arm out, and I remember feeling so uncomfortable. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know. I had just never been in a position where that was like, oh yeah, be as big as you can, So I was very nervous about that. And I was very, I liked to stay small. And so I think salsa, especially in that earlier time, really helped me to like learn to present and like be big. And so we had this weekly dance social, and I think it's still happening, but it was on Wednesdays, and it was free, and it was at actually it was like at a gay bar in Nashville, and you could go and you could dance salsa and bachata, and I think they would throw in some other dances too. This is well before they had Zouk in Nashville. And I remember bachata came on. And so I went to the sidelines, and I was like, oh, no, I don't do this dance. And this gentleman came over, and he was like, you want to dance? And I was like, oh, I don't know bachata. And he was like, oh, I'll show you. It's super easy. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And he literally taught me like the 1, 2, 3 tap, 1, 2, 3 tap. And I was like, oh, I feel like I was misled here. I feel like this is actually pretty fun. So that's actually how I discovered bachata. Was literally some guy at a social was like, no, you should try it. And he was right. So then I started taking some bachata classes and absolutely fell in love with it, which is funny to me now, because I was super like, oh, I don't want to be sensual. So I was very much like, let's do footwork and let's, have fun. And I remember the first time at that social, they would have a free workshop beforehand, and it was a bachata workshop, and I took it, and they had us do close embrace for the first time, and we had to do one of those like where you're like really close and like kind of get a little bit lower so your legs are very much in between each other. And I remember being so scandalized. I was like, oh my gosh, this is what they were talking about. it's so funny because now I'm like a Zouk dancer and do like that's not even an issue. But at the time, I was very new to it. And so it felt very uncomfortable. I was very awkward, like really awkward. But I'm really glad that I continued and pursued it and I got more comfortable. So it just took time. But yeah.
I understand that. I'm very curious. You said something earlier, or you spoke on it just now as well. Let's say for someone else who may be very similar to you, maybe shy or unconfident or just unused to being big or show you're close to somebody else. How do you think somebody can overcome that? Is it just over time, or is there something you did that helped you overcome your inhibitions?
Yeah. I think for me, some things that helped was having people that I trusted there. And so for instance, like the other salsa club members would all go to this social. So I had a handful of people there that I was already training with and was already comfortable with and felt safe with, right? That's the key at this event. So, it was kind of like I felt safe to explore. And I think that's such an important part that of that beginner process that we don't maybe emphasize as much is that it's really important to feel safe. And when you feel safe, then you can explore your things that make you uncomfortable. So having that person there was helpful. And then also taking classes. I know that sounds super cliche, but like having someone in a class, like a teacher, a trusted teacher saying, put your hand here. It's okay to do this. This is not sexual. This is not an advance. Like, this is how it should feel. I think was really helpful for me too. I think had I just been on the dance floor and someone just did that to me, I probably would have been like, what the heck are you doing? But because I took the classes and I had that structure of like, okay, this is okay and this is not okay. This is safe. This is not safe, or, that kind of thing. It really helped. That structure really helped me. And having that group of people that I could also go back to and be like, this happened. Is that right? Is that weird? Or like, so-and-so dipped me and I was kind of uncomfortable with it. And they're like, oh yeah, they shouldn't be doing that. Or like, that was really helpful to learn the ropes of the community as well. Cause like, you see professionals do all sorts of things that on the social dance floor with a stranger, you may not want to do. And learning, navigating that, navigating how to say no and how to protect myself dancing and how to kind of be more of a defensive dancer. I don't particularly like that term, but that kind of idea of like, oh, I'm about to be dipped. I don't have to dip if I don't want to, like, and being told that's okay. Like that kind of stuff really helped.
Why do you say, is it defensive dance, or what term do you not like? And why don't you like it?
I don't like it just because I don't want people, like, personally, if I was, because I lead as well, if I was going into a dance with a person and they were defensive, I would be like, oh no, what did I do? Or like, or like, I want my follow to feel comfortable. So I feel like when you say be a defensive dancer, I hate the idea of telling people to go into a dance and be like on guard, because people are there to have fun and relax and be creative. And I don't think having a defensive mindset is like the most enjoyable or also the most creative or the safest place to be in a creative space. But I also do understand that when you're in a social, especially with hundreds, thousands of people, you can't just throw yourself to the wind either. So I like the idea of being a defensive dancer, and I think it's an important thing. And there's definitely like skills and different techniques that help you stay safer. But the term, I've heard that defensive dancer, and I'm like, oh, that makes me think of driving, where people are gonna like honk at you. You know what I mean? So I don't want that in my dancing.
so I'm curious. I guess what do you think would be a better term, a better phrase to refer to it as? Do you have one?
Maybe just like I don't have one like off the top of my head, but I guess just like with that question, I like the idea of like a conscious dancer, like making conscious choices of like, oh yes, I'm comfortable with this, or like, oh, I don't like that. Like, I've gone into dances, so I do Zouk obviously, so I do head motion, and sometimes my neck hurts, Or like, sometimes my balance is off. I have inner ear issues. And so sometimes like I'm not having a good balance day and I'll be like, hey, can we not do head motion? And they'll try and lead it on me. They'll say yes, but sometimes memory or like habit will kick in and they'll try and lead it and I'll stop them and be like, oh, sorry, can't do that. Or like, oh, yep, I can't do head motion. They're like, oh, right. It's not a malicious thing, but it's like a protecting my own boundaries, right? Just being conscious of my own limits, where I'm at that day, how I'm feeling, and being willing to nicely or consciously protect that boundary has really gone a long way for me and my partner, whoever I'm dancing with, too, to be like, make the experience better for me and being like the owner of that. And as much as I can be, right? Because it is a partner dance. So that other person has to be respectful of that too. But yeah, so I'm like a conscious dancer.
Okay. I like a conscious dance. I definitely understand that. I want to ask you this, since you said you both lead and follow. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of leaders out there who want to be the best lead possible. So let me ask you this: what can leaders do to make sure that their followers feel safe? Do you have any advice, any tips, wisdom on that?
Yeah. So, my gosh, there's so much. I'll keep it short. I think first and foremost, knowing how the body works, like how your own body works. I'm a very much a proponent of learn how to move yourself before moving another person or asking another person to move. And I think that's sometimes a missed step. I know I hear a lot of my students, but also I know I've fallen into this myself when I'm learning to lead. It's like, oh, I need to go, take another class and learn another fancy pattern. Like my follow's going to be bored. And I've done my 5 really comfortable moves and now I got to throw 6 like experimental things. And what ends up happening a lot of times is those moves that aren't quite in your body, or those things that you think you're leading, but you may not be leading because you haven't figured out the mechanics within yourself, can really feel rough. And it's very easy when you're thinking like pattern, just to completely overlook the follow, the connection. And when that happens, it's very easy to feel rough. It's also very easy to kind of ignore, not on purpose, but ignore the boundaries that your follow is putting out, the signals that your follow is putting out. And also if your follow wants to be creative and is like doing something and you're not, you got your blinders on, then you cut them off and it's like, oh, that's a womp right there. So I think learning how to move yourself and really being intentional with learning how to move and be stable as your own dancer is such a big part of being a comfortable, safe lead. And then because I think that the other half of that, right, is to be in tune with the person that you're dancing with, right? So if you get onto that dance floor, it's a 50-50 partnership. You win or lose together. So, going in with that mentality, sometimes I'll hear leads be like, oh, well, I make the decisions, or like, well, I decide what happens. And that's true to an extent. But sometimes I feel like that particular mentality can be a little like take the agency away from the follow. And I think if we have more of a mindset, and like when I go into it, I think of us as we're both dancers. I don't know if I've used this on the internet yet, but sometimes I think of it like a book club. Like we're both reading the same book. And as the lead, I'm like leading the book club. But like we both have to talk about the book, which would be the music, right? So we're both interpreting, we're both listening, we're both in that moment together. I'm just, setting the stage. I'm the one that's like cleaned up my living room and like set out cookies. You know what I mean? So I like to think of it that way, or I'm the one leading the discussion. But if you think about it as like a partnership, I think that creates a lot more of a safe environment for people in general.
I definitely understand that. I understand everything you're saying. I'm very curious. Is this something that just comes with time and continued practice?
Yeah. So, I mean, with anything, a skill, right, comes with time and consistency. So practicing consistently, taking classes, learning from kind of like what I was saying earlier when I was super new and was like uncomfortable with everything, taking classes with people that you trust and that are like in the style that you want and that sort of thing is so, so important. But also having that practice time of like, working it into your body. I know I've heard from a lot of leads, and again, I've fallen into this too. I'm not like crapping on leads here. This is my experience as well. Sometimes it can feel like, oh, I can't practice my leading. I have to be on the dance floor to practice my leading. And that's not really, that's not really the case. There's a lot you can work on by yourself and that needs to be worked on. And yes, you can absolutely build it by like going social dancing for 10 years, but you could also be working on it alone and go way faster. So it's really just, it really is just like, how much time do you have to put into it? How much money, of course, do you have to put into it? But the more time and the more consistently you work on it, of course, the faster you're going to build the skill. And so I know that that's always like the letdown answer of like, it takes time and practice, womp, but it really does benefit. It really, over time.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I definitely do. I asked you about salsa and bachata, so I'll do the follow-up question. Tell me about your beginner stage in Brazilian Zouk. What was that like for you?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, the first time I experienced it, I hated it. Now, in fairness, I feel like that does deserve a caveat of like, I was a beginner dancer. Like, it wasn't that I was like an expert in salsa and bachata and then just like, hated Zouk. It was more of like, I had no idea what I was doing in anything. And I was already so far out of my comfort zone, I think, with salsa and bachata, just at that stage, that something new that seemed even scarier. So I also mentioned before I have inner ear issues. And so it's very easy for me to get dizzy. And especially at that time, I wasn't trained in dancing yet. And so my body wasn't accustomed to spinning really or anything like that. And so I think he tried to do like a snake, like one of these. And my ears were just like, I don't know what you're doing, but we don't like it. So I got super dizzy, a little bit nauseous, which is super easy for me to do. And once I'm dizzy, it's a little bit hard for me I need to like sit down, sip some water, take a second. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll never be able to do this dance. So it felt like a barrier to entry really was that head motion and the using the head a lot and like off axis stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I'll never be able to do that. So whatever. And then once I started taking some classes, it always goes back to that. And I started learning the basics, which have nothing to do with head motion. And like, you don't do anything with this yet. I was like, oh, I can dance Zouk without doing all this stuff. That's great. I think I had a lot more fun with it at that point and was like, oh, right, I can just, learn all the footwork because Zouk has a lot of footwork that's different than salsa and bachata. And learning lateral was a job and a half. I remember I struggled with that. That's like the second basic step of Zouk. And I was just like, what are my feet supposed to be doing? And I actually have a video of me at one of these social events from like the first few months of me dancing Zouk. And I'm both very impressed with myself and also like appalled. I look at it because I'm like, oh my God, that was me. But also, I was doing my best. I was having a good time. And I think that was the most important part, was kind of just allowing myself to be bad at it at the beginning and just being like, yeah, this will take some time. And then I focused on the head motion part later. And I really was able to train my body and my ears to become more comfortable with that. And I got better at that. So, but those early years, man, that was rough. I was very scared of head motion, which I think I hear that from a lot of people. So
I definitely understand that. I have like two questions I want to ask you.
Yeah.
For someone who may be intimidated or maybe scared or unwilling to start Brazilian Zouk, tell me what kept you going in those difficult times you faced? Why did you stick with it?
Yeah, no, that's a great one. I was going to be like, let me answer it from a lead and a follow perspective. But then I was like, oh, wait, it's the same answer. The community. I mean, just straight up, it's, I think that's one of the reasons why most people get into it, right? Is they have friends that do it or a significant other that does it. And then they make friends. And they like the community. So because I was dating, especially those early days, I was dating my then dance partner, who his favorite dance was Zouk. So like, it's kind of hard to escape your partner's favorite dance. So we would travel, and we took a few friends with us from like the salsa club, and we would travel to a city about 2 hours away. And because they had weekly classes and socials and things like that in Zouk, because there wasn't Zouk in Nashville at the time. And so, I mean, we would basically go on a road trip like every week, right? And so, I mean, we became very close friends with this kind of little group of us that would travel from Nashville. And then we met it was Knoxville. So we met the Knoxville people, and we became friends with them because we were spending all this time with them every week. And also, when you're in a group who are hungry for knowledge and who want to get better, it's very infectious. So even though it was tough and even though it was frustrating, you know, we were all going through that. Even we were all at different levels too. So, I mean, we were all having like, oh my gosh, I just can't get this thing. And like, I've practiced it 100 times and I just can't get it. We all had those moments, and it was all like, oh, well, let me help you, or let's practice it. Or, you know, let's go do something that's not dance related for a second. Let's go, you know, get drinks or something. And I think having that community, having that group was really, really important. And even though it was a small group, because I know for a lot of people, they're not in a city that has like a huge Zouk population, but even just having 1 to 2 people that you're like in it together is so vital. It is very, very hard. And I have friends who are like by themselves in cities, and it's very hard. And so they end up traveling. So if you have the money and the time, traveling to Zouk congresses and weekenders and things like that can be so helpful, because it really is that community aspect.
Well, let me ask you this first. How long have you been teaching?
Probably like 7-ish years.
Okay.
Do you want me to go into detail about that?
Well, we definitely can. Let me ask you this first.
Yeah.
And you can kind of hopefully segue into both of them.
Okay.
Tell me about your beginner stage in teaching, because just because you're good at something does not automatically make you a good teacher.
They are very different skills.
Definitely.
Sure. Yeah. So my first foray into teaching was at that salsa club. So, you know, Justin and I at that time were dating. We're not dating anymore. I feel like I've talked about me and him dating for so long at this point that I feel like it's important to say we dated for like 6 months. So like, and then we were still friends and taught together after that. But yeah, so while we were dating, I would assist him. And I very much was like the picturesque, like, didn't say anything, like there as a prop, don't talk to me, I don't know anything kind of person. But it was still a good experience in the sense that I got that, oh, I'm super blurry. Hold on 1 second. Hello. My camera is just like, doesn't know what to do with me. I move around a lot. I'm curious if
it's because you have your background blurred.
Probably.
But it's not a big deal.
I'm currently moving.
Yeah, no, it's not a big deal at all. Yeah, not a big deal at all.
Okay, great. Sorry. So it was really good for me, I think, to just at least see the process, what that looks like, and also just enough of a spark to be like, I want to do that. I think I could be good at that. And so we started teaching Zouk together because there was no other Zouk dancers in Nashville. It was just me and him. And so we were like, okay, well, if we start teaching classes, we can have friends to like learn Zouk together. So, and which is ultimately what happened. We ended up getting like a good core group of people. And I mean, the classes weren't like super successful, but also like I wasn't a good teacher. I will go so far as to say I was not a good teacher yet. I like to think I'm a good teacher now, but at the time I was learning a lot. But we did get really good feedback from people. So sometimes people wouldn't come back and we would reach out and be like, hey, just like checking in. And they would, to their credit, be very nice and give us very real feedback. And that was really helpful, actually. It hurt, but it was good to know. And I think that's an important thing for anyone who's an aspiring teacher, is that you need the feedback and it's not going to feel good. And that's okay. But you're going to have to make mistakes as you go. And this is, I mean, I guess for dance or life or anything, you have to make mistakes. You have to be bad at it sometimes. And so one of the reasons I went into ballroom after college was because I wanted teacher training. And they offered teacher training if you became an instructor. So there was a ballroom studio like 10 minutes from my parents' house. So I graduated from college because I promised my parents I would, even though I was super into dance. And they were like, yeah, but you're going to graduate though, right? So I graduated. And and so I basically walked into this dance studio with very little experience and was like, so I want to be a dance teacher. And they were like, oh, great, here's an application. And basically what you would do is before you could teach and before you got students or anything like that, you had to basically apply and join their teacher training. And it was every day for 2 hours, I think, or something like that. And you would go in and for 2 hours, you would drill technique, patterns, teaching, literal teaching training, all that kind of stuff. And you had to do that for like several months. And then at some point you could take the tests, right? There was like a practical test. And basically you had to take one of the senior instructors and teach an entire lesson as if they had walked in and were a new student. You had to teach them all the way through their first lesson, all the way through to them leaving. And if you passed, you got a contract and you basically became contracted. And there's other stuff that happens after that, but that was the gist. And so I did that for months. And I look back at that time and I'm really thankful that I did that, because even though it wasn't Zouk and it wasn't salsa and it wasn't bachata, it was waltz and tango and foxtrot and things like that. It was ballroom. It was some of the best training ever. And again, very uncomfortable, just constantly being put on your toes, constantly being like, okay, Mimi, show us the footwork for the lead for the waltz box, and just being like, okay. And then getting immediate feedback on how you did. And, it wasn't mean, like no one was mean, but it was very strict in the sense that like, you got it right or wrong. Like, and they expected you to like take the feedback and be better the next time. So it was pretty serious. I mean, it was also for free. So, I mean, the idea was that you were coming to get training to teach for them. And so even though it was free in the sense that, there's after you got signed on a contract, you still had to go to teacher training. So, I mean, they were putting it on regardless. So it wasn't like, one-on-one or anything. It was like a group of teacher trainer teaching people wanting to become teachers. But yeah, it was pretty intense, but very, very, very good. And I'm really glad I had that experience. I ultimately did not end up signing a contract with them. I never got offered a contract, just total disclosure. I wasn't very good at the selling part. And if you know anything about ballroom, it's a biz. I mean, it's a money-making business. And one of the most important things for them wasn't the teaching. It wasn't how well you knew the information. It was, could you sell the lessons? And I was much more interested in the dancing part and the teaching part. And I was much less interested in the sales part. And so I kept flunking the sales part, is basically what happened. And I finally was just like, I don't think this is for me. And so I ended up finding a independent studio who had kind of a similar situation. They had a teacher training program for free, but instead of it being for free, you had to come to all their parties and dance with all the students. So that was kind of the trade-off, was like, okay, we'll train you, but you have to come to all of our stuff and be partners for all of our students. Which again was a lot, but great training, like really great. And again, all about teaching and sales and all that stuff. But because it was an independent studio, they were like, we might give you students, but like you need to find your own students. And like, we'll teach you ways to get students, but like ultimately you're an independent instructor here and you're going to have to do that yourself, because that's kind of the trade-off, which was really good for me. It was really good training in marketing and like self-branding. That's actually when I became Mimi Mariposa. It's not my legal name. A lot of people think it is, and I really wish I could whip out my ID and have Mimi Mariposa on it. And I did look into legally changing my name, but that is like a whole can of worms that I'm not willing to to open. But yeah, so personal branding, like becoming Mimi Mariposa, and which was a nickname given to me, by the way. I didn't just pick that. But yeah, was really good dance training, but was also really good just also how to talk to students, like etiquette as a teacher at a social, dancing with all levels of people and still making it enjoyable for them, especially when they're nervous, right? Because you're the teacher, right? And then having to like navigate that in a dance setting was also really, really good. So when people ask me about like teaching, and people have approached me and been like, oh, I want to be a teacher. And I'm like, great. It's a whole other thing. Like it's a whole other skill. So it really does take its own dedication and training, honestly.
This is very true. And as a teacher, you have a lot of responsibility as well. So it is a lot. It is a lot. Let me ask you this, since you've been in the Brazilian Zouk community for such a long time now, I would be very curious to hear from you. What are some common issues that you've seen amongst your students that you wish you could rectify for everyone?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I really wish I could wave a magic wand and make everyone okay with making mistakes. I know that sounds so weird, probably, but I have taught hundreds of students at this point, right? And without fail, one of the things that, again, I experienced this on my own journey too. One of the things that holds people back the absolute most is that they don't want to try something because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to, like, whether it's a student who walks in and has taken like 2 or 3 classes and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for social dancing yet because I don't know enough yet. And it's like, you could literally stand there and do the basic. And especially if you're like, hey, I just know the basic. Do you mind just like doing the basic with me? People would be like, sure, why not? And like, no one would care. But because they're worried about making mistakes, they won't just do it. And on lessons, I'll have even my more experienced students, being like trying something, and they'll just stop halfway through. And I'm like, no, just keep going. And they're like, well, but I messed this part up. And I'm like, that's fine. It's more important that you like do it over and over and over again, even if you make a mistake. And it really holds you back from progressing, because if we are so worried about making mistakes, then we won't put in the necessary time and repetition to get better. So it makes the process so much longer. But I totally get it. Like as a dancer, I get that anxiety of being like, oh, I don't want to make a mistake, or I don't want to look dumb, or I don't want to hurt my follow, or I don't, all these things like worries and anxieties. I wish I could just take those away. Not the worrying about hurting your follow part, but like the whatever that is that stops us from just doing it and making the mistake and learning from the mistake, because you have to make mistakes to get better. Like that's just how it works, unfortunately, right? Wouldn't it be great if that wasn't how that worked?
What are some lessons that you've learned from dancing that you're able to translate to your everyday life?
Ooh, that's a good one. How to deal with people. Like, I mean, maybe that's more my teacher training, but just really learning how to listen and empathy, like having empathy for another person and being able to, even without words, just hold space for somebody and just be like, you're having, an emotional moment, and I'm just going to be here with you, and being comfortable to do that. Because in dance, so often we aren't talking, or if we're talking, some people like really hate that, right? On the dance floor. It's like a huge pet peeve for some people. But you have to be able to be reading that other person, right? And like maybe they're really into the song and you aren't. And you just have to be there for them and be like, well, I'm here for you because I'm not feeling it. Or vice versa, even just being comfortable with being like where you're at, right? If like I'm super feeling the music and my lead or my follow just isn't, being okay with that. So like those, I guess, unspoken human interactions, dance has really helped with that. Especially as like a very shy, awkward person coming into dance. I feel like my social skills have really improved because of dance, because it is such a, like going back to that community aspect, like having to ask people for help, having to rely on other people and being like, I need to try this, and I've practiced it and I've seen it and I've taken the class, but I just need to like run through it 3 times. And even if it's horrible, like I just needed to do it 3 times to like get it in my body. So yeah, I don't know if that's a weird answer, but yeah, social skills, honestly.
I definitely understand that. Especially like if you're not used to maybe spending a certain duration with someone.
Yeah.
It's going to help you. Yeah, I definitely understand social skills. I definitely understand 100% understand that. I'm curious. Let me ask you this. Just these random questions popping in my head.
Yeah, no worries.
With Latin dances, salsa and bachata, there's like this little crossover.
Mm-hmm.
If you practice one, you can somewhat draw inspiration, also improve your skills with it. I'm curious, do you think there's any crossover between Brazilian Zouk and maybe salsa bachata, or maybe even kizomba? Is there any crossover that maybe one thing can help you in this, or vice versa?
Yeah. So I'll give you my honest opinion, and it may be unpopular. So warning, but it's just my opinion. I can't speak for the whole Brazilian Zouk world, of course, or anything like that. But personally, I feel like on the social dance floor, within reason, anything goes. If you and your partner, whether you're a lead or follow, so whoever your partner is, can lead and follow it, it fits the music, and you both are having fun, that's the goal. So I know earlier in my dance career, I used to be more of a purist and was like, no, it has to be like Zouk, and you can't be doing like those other things that like draw from other dances. Like I was very anti-fusion. So I'm sorry to all my fusion friends. I have changed my ways, but outside of like because there are fusion communities where they legitimately, you go in and like you don't know what is going to be thrown at you, because that's the whole point, is to like do fusion. So a song comes on that you've probably never heard, and your partner might say, oh, I know tango, salsa, and zouk. And I'll be like, I know waltz, West Coast, and I don't know, jive. And they're going to be like, okay. And you just create a dance together. Now that's its own, like that's a community in of itself. But I think even on the social dance floor at like a bachata social, like I have people lead me in Zouk head motion, and I'm like, ooh, and they'll be like, ooh, you're a Zouk follow, okay. And then they start like throwing stuff in there, or like, in the Zouk world, I've definitely seen more bachata-y moves thrown in now. Like there's like a slide that I first saw in bachata that now I'm seeing people do in Zouk, which I think is super cool, right? Like I think there's only so many ways we can move our bodies, right? And I think as long as we're interpreting the music and like having fun, that's kind of the point. And so I do think they absolutely draw inspiration from each other, and especially as more dancers cross over and like do both, and do all of them, right? Because there's more than just salsa, bachata, and Zouk. Like I have a bunch of Westy Zouk friends, and I have bachata Zouk friends and salsa Zouk friends, and ballroom Zouk friends. There's less of those, but they do exist. But yeah, so they all draw from each other. Like I found a song that had like a waltz timing in it, and I have a friend who does Zouk but also does ballroom, and I was like, look, this song has a zoukable beat. And then in these like particular moments in the song, they like do a timing change, which is super rare. Like not many songs do that. And it goes from 4/4 to 3/4. And I was like, you are the only person I know that knows both of these dances. Would you please do this with me? And we didn't film it or anything. We were just goofing around with it and like playing with it. But we were able to mix Zouk and waltz. Like you can just, as long as you're willing to explore it, you can do anything you want, you know?
I'm curious, what are your thoughts on Sensual Bachata?
Ooh, I like Sensual Bachata, the dance.
Okay.
I have had I'm going to be very careful how I say this, I guess. I have had very negative experiences in the actual dancing of Sensual Bachata. And I think, I think the Sensual Bachata community is aware of these things, and I don't consider myself part of the Sensual Zouk or the Sensual Bachata community. So I'm sure that they're addressing it in their own way. I have friends who are part of that and like teach Sensual Bachata and things like that. But I know that for me personally and like a bunch of other people, it's like we like the dance and we'll dance it with people we trust, but it's hard to go social dancing Sensual Bachata because just crazy crap happens. That's like too often for me personally. So it's unfortunate.
Okay, I understand. Well, I mean, now that you're bringing it up, I have to ask. Yeah. I'm still like a beginner in Brazilian Zouk, definitely.
Sure.
I'm more experienced in salsa, bachata, kizomba.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you bring up, crazy stuff happening in sensual bachata, are you saying that it's not as bad as in Brazilian Zouk? And in my
experience, yeah.
Okay, and real quick, this is kind of came in my head as well. Would you say that Brazilian Zouk is not a sensual dance?
Oh, I think it is. I don't think it has to be though. Right, like in sensual bachata, in my experience, I'm just going to keep saying in my experience. I'm just going to keep throwing it in there. Even when I've taken classes, even when I've social danced it, there is a emphasis on being sexy and body waves and big dips and things, just things that make it more like, which I do enjoy that energy, to be completely honest. But in Zouk, there's absolutely a sensual aspect to Zouk, especially if you dance with like Brazilian dancers. They are so much more open with touching and just being like, just a little bit more open with their sensualness, excuse me, than we maybe are in America. And so it's super fun, but it never feels, I guess it can, right? Depending on who the person is, but in general, it hasn't felt predatory. Let me put it that way. And I don't, when I go and experience like a Brazilian Zouk social and they play maybe a more sensual set, or it's a DJ who's known for more sensual, gooey stuff, I don't get inappropriately touched. I don't have men particularly, asking to sleep with me or, things like that, or saying inappropriate things to me. Also, I don't get injured at Zouk socials as much. And unfortunately, and again, I don't know how universal of an experience this is, but the last several times I've gone sensual bachata dancing, and usually it's mixed with salsa, to be fair. It's usually not just like only sensual bachata. I've gotten like legitimately injured, like bleeding. One of the last times I went bachata dancing, a guy just like smashed my foot with his foot. And then he just kept going because he was in the middle of dancing. And so he just didn't care. And I literally had to go sit down. I was in so much pain. Now my feet were fine. But it definitely I left after that because I was like, I am in pain. The dude is still dancing, does not care, probably drunk, let's be honest. His movements made me believe that maybe he was a little bit drunk, which would also make sense why he didn't have good spatial awareness. But that kind of stuff happens to me at bachata, like sensual bachata stuff. And I can't even remember the last time I was injured at a Zouk social. Now, I've definitely been hit at Zouk socials or things like that, and I've seen injuries at Zouk socials. So they're not like, I don't know, like magical places where you don't ever get hurt, but it's just a lot less. And I'm not really sure what that is or why that is, but unfortunately, that's my experience. So it is just kind of, it's sad, really.
I'm curious. This is me just talking aloud.
Yeah.
I'm curious if maybe, I don't know if it's the barrier to entry or maybe the intimidation factor is less bachata. And so maybe you get more range of people or more people in general. When I look at Brazilian Zouk, I would think to myself, I don't know if I could lead that. But if I look at some bachata, I'd be like, I might could do that. And so
I could probably do it.
and maybe, I don't know, maybe I believe it's safe to say that bachata is more popular currently than Brazilian Zouk. Would you argue with that?
Nah. Well, so this is my theory. And again, I'm just spitballing my own thoughts here. This is not backed up with research. I have a theory that because bachata is more connected to culture, right? Like the Dominican Republic, it comes from like from a culture who is like, this is our dance, right? Like people dance this at parties and like at home, in certain parts of the world. It's much more a cultural identity or part of a cultural identity. Whereas Zouk, Brazilian Zouk specifically, was like a music from a different country that came to Brazil, and Brazilians were like, or lambada dancers in Brazil were like, hey, we could dance our dance to this. And they kind of adopted it. It was never a Brazilian identity, right? It's not like samba where, you know, you're not going to walk up to a random Brazilian on the street and be like, do you know Zouk? They might. It's happened before, but I've met a lot of Brazilians like in the wild, so to speak, outside of dance, where they had no idea what Zouk was or never heard of it, because it's not a cultural identity for them. It's not something that's like rooted in their traditions necessarily. Now, that's not to say it's separate from Brazil. Like it is still from Brazil and, you know, has its own culture or like own history there. But it's a pretty new dance, let's be honest. It's like 60 something years old. So it doesn't have that same cultural ties, I think, that bachata does. And so I think there's also like a lot more, like Zouk comes from a bunch of different techniques and was made in like dance studios versus bachata that was like a family dance to do at parties, or not a family dance, but like a dance that you might dance bachata with your like grandma, you know, at a party, from what I understand. And that grew into more from there and has branched and things like that. So I think in some ways that makes it, well, it's also older, but it makes it more accessible in some ways, because 3 steps and a tap and you're dancing bachata, you know what I mean? And you can kind of throw anything in you want, especially early on, and it's fine. Whereas Zouk has even the basic step, even if you do it in place, there's like stuff to do. It's easy to learn it, but you need to learn it to do it. And of course, there's lots of technique in bachata. So this is not me being like, oh, bachata's easy. I mean, it can be, but like there is technique to bachata, and there is like so much to explore there. But that's my theory. I think that I've been thinking about this more recently, and I was talking to one of my friends, and I was like, I think this is a thing, and they agreed with me. But I guess it'll be up to the internet to decide what they think.
No, I agree with you. I'll speak on it. People get upset, but I mean, bachata is a very simple dance, and of course, you can make it more complicated the more you progress in that dance. But if you compare the beginner stage in bachata to the beginner stage in Brazilian Zouk, I don't think there's any question of which was more difficult, especially for the leader, in my opinion. Leading in Brazilian Zouk, you have to have the utmost care for your partner. There's so much that can go wrong, and so I definitely, I won't argue with you at that one bit. Real quick, you spoke on it real quick. How much you know about the history of Brazilian Zouk?
I like to think I know quite a bit.
Okay.
I've talked to several Brazilians Brazilian people about it. And also I took the MAC program, which is the Methodology de Alex de Cavallo. And he has a whole like 2-hour thing about, and like from researchers from Brazil who have talked about the history of Zouk. So I feel like I know a fair bit.
Could you speak on
but
it,
I'm definitely
please?
not the expert.
Okay. Could you?
Yeah.
I think I know a little bit about it, but I would love to hear what you have learned.
So from my understanding, it has roots in so many different dances, like African dances, specifically like machixe, but also like polka and like ballroom dances and things like that. So it really, the music itself comes from oh my gosh, the Caribbean islands, like
Caribbean
Guadalupe.
Zouk. The original Zouk. Caribbean
The original,
Zouk,
yeah. The like origin of the music itself is like very Caribbean. It was Guadalupe, and there's another one, but I cannot remember the name of the island. Oh my gosh. Anyway, doesn't matter. So, or it matters, but like my sake of time. But yeah, so that music was like party music. It's like islandy. It's very traditional. Zouk is very fun. It's very like upbeat. You could definitely feel like you're on a beach at a party. And so that's where I got its name, Zouk. And there's some debate on what Zouk means, but roughly party, I assume, or like that's what I've heard. And that's what kind of everyone agrees on. But TBD. That music hit Brazil around the time that lambada the music for lambada was dying. There's like a whole history to that. And the lambaderos were like, well, shoot, what do we do? And they actually, fun fact, and I've actually heard people who like were there, they held a funeral for lambada. Like they actually did like a whole procession and everything in like, was it in Rio or Sao Paulo? One of the two. And it was a thing. So when they heard the Zouk music, they were like, oh, we can take our lambada, slow it down a little bit, change it a bit, and dance it to Zouk music. And you can still find something pretty similar to that called Zouk lambada or lamba Zouk. The timing is different now from like traditional Rio style Zouk, Brazilian Zouk. But there is a dance that is also called Zouk that's like Caribbean Zouk. And so it's very important to say Brazilian Zouk because they are different dances. They have different histories. Like they are separate.
And some people will get upset if you don't make that distinction.
Yes. Which I mean, I get that. Like if I had a thing that was mine and some person over there was like, I'm going to start using that same name and not tell anyone that you had it first or that and it's a completely different thing. Like I'd be like, wait, what? So I do get it. But also it does come from Zouk music. So I don't think personally, I think it's okay that we say the Zouk because it did come from the history is tied, but yeah, it is Brazilian Zouk. And yeah, so basically, it was like lambada dancers, which was a pretty hard dance. One of the problems with lambada, not problems, but one of the sticking points with lambada was that it was very difficult. It was very fast paced. It was very hard on the body. So it wasn't as accessible to people. And so when they slowed it down, they started doing it to Zouk music. It became more accessible. And it was actually, believe it or not, easier. And so they also mixed it with a lot of things. So like Bzouk, for instance, I saw you have some videos on Bzouk. I actually trained with Ian earlier on in my dance career. And he taught me some Bzouk for like over a year. And like they do a lot of ballet. So there's a ton of ballet terms in Bzouk because that's what they had. It also comes from like a master of capoeira, right, which is another Brazilian dance / fighting form. So, it's kind of like the people took it and they kind of like added stuff. And it just kind of depends on which lineage and who it comes from on what got added and the kind of styles. So of course there's like a bunch of styles of Zouk now. So it's a very like fairly young dance, like fairly young. And it's also quite a melting pot of techniques and all sorts of stuff. Like there's a move called soltinho, but there's actually a whole dance called soltinho. So like even just that kind of thing, like it borrowed one move and called it soltinho, but like that's actually a whole dance. It's like a Brazilian swing dance. So it's very fascinating and it's cool, but it is like, it's not straightforward, It wasn't like, I think of like Argentine tango where it was like, done in the streets is like, subverting, power, which is super cool. But that is not really, it's not really that kind of clear cut where it comes from, honestly.
I don't know much about Argentine tango. I have to look that up. I'll look that
it's
up.
super cool. You should totally look up the history of Argentine tango.
Okay.
And if I got that wrong, I apologize to Argentine tango.
For someone who feels like they're stuck in a rut, like they're not getting better, and this probably applies to both lead and follows, but they feel like they're not getting better. What advice can you give that person who feels like they're stuck in a rut?
So I'll give them the same advice that I got in teacher training from that ballroom studio that I went like 2 hours every day. One of the master trainers sat us down one time and was like, okay, guys, I'm going to talk about something serious. And we were like, oh gosh, okay. He really wanted to get our attention. And he was like, I want you to know that you're going to hit walls in your dance journey, in your teaching and your dancing. And he was like, a lot of people will hit a wall or a plateau or feel stuck. And they'll give up and they'll be like, I'm not good at it. Or, this isn't worth it. Or, I'll never be good. Or, all those things that we tell ourselves. Right. And he was like, but I just want you to know that everyone hits them. You're the most experienced teachers, the most experienced dancers, your favorite pro dancer, everyone experiences them. And the people who get really good are the ones that push through. And that was probably one of the most honest and true pieces of advice I have ever received in my entire dance training, because it's so true. Like, I've hit ruts over and over and over. I think it's just part of the natural process of learning, right? Like, you work really, really hard and then you're getting better. And then you're like, yeah. And then you're like, oh shoot, I've been here a minute. And then you work really hard. And sometimes, maybe you take a break and you go down a little bit. Like, it's like change and learning isn't linear, even like we like to think of it that way. Like, I would love if I just continued to get better all the time, but life happens. And so I would say, to anyone who's experiencing a rut, one, it's okay. It's normal, which I think sometimes is nice to know when you're in that moment, because it doesn't feel like anyone else is in a rut. Like, it doesn't feel like anyone else is experiencing that, but it's totally normal, totally fine. It's also okay to take a break for a few weeks to a month. Like, I think sometimes people are scared to take a break, or, they get burnt out, or maybe they need to like let their bank account replenish, and it's okay to take a break. Your dancing skill will still be there and you'll be better for the break. And that's for teachers and dancers, honestly. Also, something that helps me when I'm feeling in a rut, if it's not just I need to take a break for a little bit, is also getting inspired is really, really helpful. Sometimes it can be easy to get into a pattern, and whatever that pattern is for you, maybe that's why you're feeling in a rut. So maybe going to a dance congress, maybe going to a different city, going to a weekender, trying a different teacher, grabbing a dance partner, or grabbing a friend and being like, let's try some experimental stuff, watching dance videos. So whatever is out of the norm for you, just give it a try. You'll be surprised where inspiration hits. So sometimes for me, if I'm feeling in a super rut, taking a dance class or going to a social, even in another city, if you have the time and energy and money to do that, is always super helpful for me. I was in like a super big rut, and I was in New York for something else. But there was a dance social, a Zouk social, and I went just randomly, and I had a blast. And I was like, wow, I really needed this. I just needed a different scene with some different people to get kind of the creative dancey juices flowing. And that's okay. So sometimes it's just getting out of the pattern that you've set for yourself, and that's okay to change it up.
I definitely understand that. I definitely agree with all of that. I definitely do. Let me ask you this: for someone who is an intermediate dancer and they want to get to that advanced level, in your opinion, what does it take?
Gosh, honestly, it's a lot about the details. I'm sure this has been said before. I forget where I heard it, but I forget who has said this before. But when you're learning a skill, but especially dance, there's like a huge chunk at the beginning that you can kind of like get on. the basic step, how to hold a frame, basically. Learning to step on rhythm. Like those are like big milestones that like once you have them, great. Like you've learned a chunk of the dance. Learning patterns, right? Those are kind of big things. But when you start talking about like feeling really comfortable, getting your own style, being intermediate advanced, it's the details. It is the little details that it's like how you articulate your foot. Like that's going to take some zhuzhing to figure out how much tension to have in your frame, like, you know, all those kinds of things, how to feel the dance, you know. But I also think something that's really important between intermediate and advanced is creativity. And you will see like the super advanced dancers, and this isn't any dance, they create in the moment. They play, they explore, they emote, right? Like it's like you're watching art being made, right? And I think that as scary as that can sound, I really think that that's a huge difference between like an intermediate advanced dancer. Because you have to be willing and comfortable enough to trust your technique, your body awareness, your sense of the room, your floor craft. You have to trust all of those techniques that you've built up, and then play with them, which is scary. But advanced dancers, I mean, they get really good at that, right? And so it's not, you know, 9 times out of 10, it looks amazing, but they still make mistakes. But if you notice, like either one, people don't notice the mistakes because they don't react and they're just so used to it that they're like, whatever. Or they make it into something else and it's funny or cool in and of its own right. Or it's like, oh, that happened. And they just move on because they're used to it. And I think that is a huge, huge aspect of becoming an advanced dancer.
I agree with all that, of course. And I guess this may be an obvious answer. But in order to get to that level of creativity and playfulness, that's just what experience, time, effort, you know, and this one thing, right? Is there a shortcut to it?
I mean, yes and no. I would say like the only shortcut would be to practice your creativity and freedom and explore on your own. So something I teach my leads to do, and like I have a whole online course on this, but is like if you practice it by yourself to music, and you work on just like exploring your creativity and learning to create, when you're not with a partner, it's a lot less scary and it's a lot more trial and error. It's a lot more freeing to do that by yourself. Then when you get with a partner, whether you're practicing or on the social dance floor, you've already practiced that, right? Like you've already felt what it's like in your body. You've built up that tolerance to the mistakes, you know, and like you're willing to try things and like maybe look dumb because you've already done it before. I think it's a lot to ask of yourself, especially early on, to be like, I'm going to be with a partner in a social setting on a dance floor in front of all my friends and a bunch of strangers, and then you're going to explore. Like, that's a lot. That is intimidating. So like, yes, I would say that that's like a shortcut, but it still takes doing it consistently over time. So it's not really like a shortcut, but it'll be faster than just waiting for you to feel comfortable on the social dance floor to like one day randomly be super creative like on the dance floor. Like that's not really the conditions to help promote that, if that makes sense. So I think you can absolutely do it. It's just going to take longer, or you might have to like fall into it, honestly, rather than being more intentional with it.
No, I understand that. I definitely do. Let me ask you this: in your opinion, what makes for a good social versus a bad social or dance party?
you're trying to get me in trouble. Okay. No, I'm kidding. Well, so I guess I'm going to have like a cop-out answer a little bit. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve. As an organizer, there's so many options, right? Like you can really, and there's already so many like established options, right? So like you can have a social with in a dance studio with a DJ who won't put any cuts in between the music with all the lights off and like fun party lights. But you can also be outside with like some speakers and have like a sunset dance. You can also be in a gym and have all the lights on with low music and encourage people to talk and practice. So like so many options, right? And I've seen even some more experimental ones, like Zouk in the Dark was a thing several years ago. I don't even know if it's still happening, but basically they would like start with like an intentional like consent and this is what we're doing and we're all like consciously going into this, and then they turned off the lights and people danced. And I never experienced it, so I don't know exactly what it looked like, but I know the lights were very low or off. So I like, you can literally do anything you want. So it really is like what intention is behind the event and what how you set it up and how you communicate that to people, because you don't want to create like Zouk in the Dark and then people think it's a practica and they come and then they're like what is this? I think something that would make for me personally a good social is I like being able to see my partners. So I like a little bit of lights. I don't necessarily want to be in the dark. I also don't like the music to be too loud. I have sensitive ears, as I mentioned before. So I usually wear like earplugs to dance events and things because the music is just too loud for me. There was actually one event I had to leave because the music was so loud. So like that for me personally is like a thing, but I know there's some people who want the music cranked up as high as it can go. So it really just depends. It's personal preference, really. I also feel like having water available is like key for me now at this point. I'm just like, can we at least have water? Like that would be great. And snacks. I've been to several socials now in other dance forms like West Coast Swing, where they have snacks. And I'm like, why are we doing this? Why do we not have snacks? What? So yeah, I don't know. Those are just some of my preferences, but yeah.
I understand. I definitely understand that. The snack sounds like a great idea. A great idea. Let me ask you this real quick. Gina, you trained in multiple styles. Can you put into words, I would assume that Brazilian Zouk is your favorite dance style. Can you put into words, what draws you to it and what connects you to what makes it your favorite thing to dance? Why do you like it so much?
Yeah. I think I feel the most free in Zouk. And I think that for me, that's really important. Like I like ballroom and I'm a recovering perfectionist, but I have a lot of perfectionism tendencies. And so I like to be told I'm doing it right. I like to be 100% right. And in ballroom, you can like achieve that more easily because there is like a very set curriculum and like, things like that. Like you can like a quarter of a turn here and, that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that. But it really, in my opinion, like in my experience, it really limited me too, because it was so like, oh, I have to do this exactly right, which was fun in its own way. But I couldn't explore. Like you couldn't make up a new waltz pattern and people be like, yeah. People were like, what are you doing? That's not part of the syllabus. Like you can't use that in competition. Like, what do you like? Why? And I'm sure there's communities where maybe that's more acceptable, but not the ones that I was in. And so for me, even with bachata, which can be very, very open to finding all sorts of fun things, I found that Zouk in my exploration of it has allowed within the dance, within the techniques of Zouk, so much more creativity and so much more freedom. Like you can really, I earlier on in my dance career, I haven't heard anyone say this recently, but like Zouk is like the modern dance of partner dances, where like you can be standing face to face and be like doing snakes together, and people are just like, yeah. You can be doing crazy head motion and traveling across the floor, and people are like, yeah. And you can stand there and be doing hip isolations and not moving your feet, and people are like, yeah. And it's like, wow, that's quite the range. Like you can just kind of, now there's limitations, obviously, just from like technique perspective and things like that. There are things that people consider Zouk technique and things like that, but there's just so much to explore. Like you can just, I mean, you have off axis, you have like so many things you can do just on axis, and then you add the off axis and it just like opens up so much more. I've seen people dance Zouk and end up on the floor. Like it's just really, now obviously some spaces are more creative than others, but yeah, I really like that freedom. And I have started to explore West Coast swing, because I know that has a similar, and some people argue even more, freedom. But I am still in the beginning stages and do not feel that freedom yet. Yet. I like to think one day I will understand it more, but West Coast has a lot of technique, barrier to entry that I've experienced so far. So one day, maybe. But because I've been told that I would really like West Coast, but it just hasn't clicked yet. But yeah, so that's my favorite part about the Zouk, though. Is just all the creativity. Oh, the other thing. One of my favorite parts about Zouk is that there's just so much music that you can dance to. Like I know in other dances you can dance, bachata to anything with a 4/4 timing. But if you go to a bachata social, they're going to have like a remixed version of a song with like a bachata beat on it, right? And they do that with Zouk too. But I know several Zouk DJs who love to experiment and play, and you can find such a range of like acceptable music that will be played at a social in the dance, that it's really fun. And like I love that you can have like traditional Zouk that sounds like you're on an island, and really experimental neo Zouk that sounds like you're in a trance, and like that's allowed, and you can have a remix song, and you can have, there's plenty of non-remix songs that people were just like, we could Zouk to this, and then they just use the regular song. So it's pretty cool, actually. But yeah.
I definitely agree with that as far as the music versatility. I've heard a couple of pop songs where I'm just like, I had that boom chick, and I'm like, you definitely could accomplish that. So I definitely understand that.
Right. And so I'm super into K-pop. Like I'm obsessed. I love doing the dances, but also just like I go to the concerts, I buy the CDs, all this stuff. I have light sticks for anyone who knows what that means. But I love K-pop. And one of my goals in life right now is to have a social where we dance to K-pop music. And there's several songs that I've come across where I'm like, we could totally Zouk to this. Like we could totally do this. And there are people who are making like K-pop remixes. So taking songs that aren't as easily K-pop or aren't as easily Zoukable and like, remixing them to be Zoukable. And I'm like, oh, get me on that train because I'm ready. I'm here for it. So it's super exciting. You can really just incorporate all sorts of stuff into the Zouk music.
Definitely. I definitely understand that. Let me ask you two more questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Two-part question. Tell me what makes for a good lead. What is the ideal lead in your opinion? And then vice versa, what makes for an ideal follower? What's a good follower in your opinion?
Yeah. The ideal leader is stable, like in control of their own weight shifts and things like that. Like I think that's so important. And they're very clear. So I think stable and clear, are the two most important to me. And then comfort on top of that. I think if you add those three, and then, oh my gosh, if you put playful in there, we are having a good dance. I have told people that some of my favorite dances have been with beginners who don't really know what to do yet, but they're like stable and they know some basics, and then they just like play and we just have the most goofy, funny dances. I just have a blast. So I think a lot of people are like, oh, I need 20 moves and be able to do a different move for every 8 count of a song, or else I'm not going to be fun. And I'm like, no. I mean, you can if that's comfortable and you want to do that, totally fine. But yeah, as long as you're like stable, clear, comfortable, and playful, or musical, maybe you could like swap out playful for musical. Those are like the top for me. For a follow, being responsive. Because again, especially when you're leading on the dance floor, you don't know. I mean, obviously you can't screen every person you're going to dance with. So you don't know what their technique that they've been practicing or what classes they've taken. But just follows being open to new things and being open to things that are outside of what they've literally been taught in class is such an asset on the dance floor. Because we can get into some funky things, even if they respond differently than I was expecting. As long as they respond naturally, I can usually work with it and we can create new things, which is like so much fun. So being super responsive, but also kind of on that same vein as the lead, being stable, like in charge of their own weight. I can't tell you how many times I've like tried to do a move and this isn't blaming them, but like they get off balance and then we have to like be like, whoa, whoa, okay. And then we restart. And that could be from a myriad of things, but when it happens, it can be very like off, like throw off my flow as the lead. And I'm like, oh gosh. And then I get nervous because I want to make sure they're okay. So being very, again, stable. And also follows can be comfortable too. Like, I think we really harp on leads for being comfortable, but like there's a lot of things follow that can do to be comfortable and responsive and also musical and playful. I got feedback several years ago on a private lesson as a follow, like I was the follow. And they were like, well, you technically followed very well. They're like, you followed everything I threw at you, but I was very bored. And I was like, oh, and they're like, yeah, I just wasn't inspired by you at all. Like I could really use more creativity from you. And I was like, oh. And now that I'm a lead, because at the time I wasn't really leading, like I knew how to lead, but it wasn't something I did all the time. Now I understand when I dance with follows and they just give me nothing. And I'm like, oh God, I have to do like I have to do everything. Like I'm gonna have to make this. It's just a lot of pressure on me. I feel nervous when that happens because I'm like, are you enjoying this?
I'm sorry, do you mean just like a blank facial expression, like no emotions or
No, even just, I mean, yes, that is part of it. Although, I mean, some people are thinking and like they get thinking face, and I totally get that. But even just like putting emphasis on things, like there's so much follows can do. I know when we talk about styling, a lot of times we talk about the arms, which is totally fine. But there's like things to play with in the body. Like if we're in open, like if we're in abertura, like I have so many options that I can play with the lead that I'm given. So if someone says like switch weight, I can add a little hip flare into that. And as long as it doesn't affect my lead, which it shouldn't, why not? Right. And when I'm leading and I can see that, it makes me so excited. And I'm like, ooh, maybe we'll do some more hip stuff, or like, ooh, like maybe I'll put us into open again and see what else happens. Or, there's like, again, that book club analogy. It's like the other person talking about the book and you're like, yeah, now we can have a discussion. Whereas like, I don't want to lecture someone about the book and they just sit there. You know what I mean? I want to know that they're enjoying it. I want to know that or not even enjoying it, but just that they're responding to it as well, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely does. An analogy I often hear is that social dancing is a conversation.
Yeah.
It's its own language between two people. So, if you have one person, or if you're talking to a brick wall, I can understand that.
Yeah. And it's something that's hard for follows. I mean, following is just as much of a skill as leading is. And learning how to add your own flair is a process. Like that's just something that you learn over time, kind of like all the other things we've talked about with like leading too. Learning how to suggest moves is hard and is a whole skill in and of itself. So, I mean, some of this is just as much of a journey, or all of this is just as much of a journey for follows as it is for leads. I think we focus on how hard it is for leads at the beginning because there is so much, especially in Zouk, for leads to do. But even just like any dance, there's a lot for leads to focus on day one. And so sometimes follows get like not pushed to the side, but like kind of forgotten a little bit. But it is a skill and it's got a lot of skills packed in. So yeah.
So something I often hear is that in the beginning, initially, leads have the tougher time, but then as they progress, as both parties progress,
Mm-hmm.
in the later stages, it becomes more difficult for follows. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
I don't follow, especially
I
not at
think
a high
so.
level. Okay.
It's been my experience. I mean, I think I actually posted a graph like this on my Instagram like years ago. I should go find that. But basically, it was like when a lead starts, there's like this huge uphill battle of like all of these skills and like paying attention to the like being able to move yourself, paying attention to the follow, being clear to communicate with them, the music. Like there's just a lot. And follows kind of like go pretty quick, but leads are like, ooh, like chinking up, that first year of dance. And then after about that first year, and this is something I've experienced like in the ballroom world too. So this isn't just Zouk. After that first year, follows tend to have a harder time, not harder, but like all the details, like what I was saying for becoming a more advanced dancer. There's just so much detail and so much gray area and creativity. So once a follow knows how to react and like is good at weight shifts and things like that, then they have to learn how to be creative. Then they have to learn how to suggest things. They have to learn how to style and not hit somebody on the dance floor and, how to not throw off your lead. And all of those skills. Whereas leads, once they kind of get the gist, they tend to have a little bit of a faster trajectory after that because it's like, I see how this works, or I see how momentum works. So if I do it this way, maybe I could do it this way. And like, it's still a process. It still takes time, but I do feel like there is a little bit of an inverse situation there in that first year where follows tend to just like pick it up and leads have a much harder time. And it kind of evens out, I would say, honestly, once you get to more advanced, not like, now leads have it so much easier than follows, but follows are kind of catching up to the learning curve of the leads, and the leads, it's a little bit easier than it was at the beginning. Because the other thing too is when you teach first lessons or the first 10 lessons for somebody, right? And like on a private lesson situation, most of the time the follow, like half of what you're doing is managing the follow, because the follow is like, can you just get it? Or no, that felt wrong. Like you did it wrong. And it's like, whoa. Like, let's focus on this thing for you. And then for the leads, it's like, okay, you're going to get this. I promise. Like, it's going to take a minute, but we're going to get this. And like, sometimes, not all the time. Sometimes follows have a hard time at the beginning, but most of the time it's like follows, let's take a breath. Leads, we're going to get there. Let's do it 100 more times, So it can be tricky with couples, like specifically like couples in a relationship, because oftentimes the follow is much more willing to be vocal about their criticism. And then you have to be like, let's pause on that, and be gentle on our leads who are trying to literally learn everything at the same time. But yeah,
I definitely understand that. Something I often think about, especially as a lead, is and especially as you progress as leader, and I'm impressed with followers so much, is that when I dance, my lead is always going to be the same. I'm always going to be the same person. So I don't really have to, I have to adapt, but not as much as a follower who is constantly dancing with the new lead, who is so much that you have to adapt, be moldable. It's very impressive. And then as well, to give up control. I've followed a couple of times, and giving up control. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, it's an experience.
It is.
It's fascinating being both a lead and a follow. And I mean, exactly what you're saying is why I always suggest people should learn both roles. Even if you don't want to become like a master lead, it will help your follow to learn some leading. And if you don't want to be a master follow or follow all the time, it helps your lead so much to be able to follow a little bit. Because they're such different skill sets, but yet they are strengths. So as a lead, even though I started as a follow first for several years and I knew leading, I didn't start focusing on leading until like 4 or 5 years ago. So it helped my leading so much because I was adaptable as a follow. I was able to adapt to my follows that were dancing with me as a lead more so than if I had just picked up leading and had no follow experience, right? So they're very complementary skills, and you use the skills, they become strengths in the other role as well, which is fascinating to me. I love getting into like the nitty gritty of technique and stuff and being like, wow, but they really help each other, but they are very different experiences. Like I'll go to socials and I'll be like, I just want to follow for this one. I don't want to be in control. I don't want to make decisions. I'm not feeling it. I'm tired. I just want to follow. I want to give up control and just be free and react and like have a good time. And then other times I'm like, I am feeling so inspired. I want to lead. I want to be making decisions. I want to hit the stuff that I want to hit in the music. And they're very different experiences at socials because it's great. I feel like it really opens up the possibilities of what you can experience, which is nice.
Definitely, I definitely understand that. Real quick, last question I want to ask you. Can you give me one tip, one piece of advice that can make anyone a better dancer immediately?
Focus on your feet. Sounds so weird, but our feet are literally our connection to the floor, and almost everything in dance is about opposition, right? And so to go up, we have to put pressure down, right? So to move, we're using the floor. And people who have really good control of their feet and understand their feet, I know this sounds so funky, especially toes, knowing how to activate your toes and things, is like so helpful in dancing. And it's not something that like, you're not going to go to a group class and they're probably not going to focus that much on the feet. But in other dances they do, like ballet and modern dance and things like that, the feet are like, you could spend a whole class on them. They're very articulate. There's lots of bones. They connect to literally everything in our body. And they're where our stability comes from. They're where our connection to the floor comes from. They're where our power comes from. So like, yeah, you can do different exercises to learn how to like articulate them better, which will help with your weight shifts. It makes you a smoother dancer. Learning how to engage your toes helps with stability because it activates different muscles in your legs and your ankles, which keep you more stable. But also you can save yourself if you do like wobble or your follow wobbles or your lead wobbles. Being able to activate those muscles really helps you stay more grounded, especially with like head motion and things. Half the battle with head motion is staying balanced. Feet. I'm telling you, it's the secret. The best kept secret in dance is your feet.
Okay, that's awesome. I definitely understand that. I definitely understand it. At this point, I want to thank you so much, Ms. Mariposa, for taking time actually to talk to me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Awesome,
I had so much fun.
Hey, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it myself. I can really tell how passionate you are and how much you truly love Brazilian Zouk. So I thoroughly enjoyed this as well.
Thanks.
Of course. I
just love it.
Yeah. So I guess, real quick, tell me, do you have any upcoming events, anything you want to plug, anything you want to share?
Yeah. So I have an online course called Fearless Lead. I'm just about to launch 3.0. So this is the third iteration. So it's got all of the goodness from before, but like with student feedback and things like that. And I also have a free workshop for Zouk leads, which you can find on my website or linked on my YouTube channel or things like that. So if you're not looking for like, a super big course right now, but you just want some of my tips and things for leads that are helpful, you can take the free course. And that's my plug.
Tell me real quick, how can people get in contact with you? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, so easy way is to go to my website, which is www.mariposadancellc.com. And there's a contact me form and it'll send an email to me. But you can also just DM me on Instagram. I'm not on Facebook very much. I have a Facebook page and I do try to check it occasionally, but it is not a good way to contact me. And I apologize to anyone who messages me on Facebook. I'm so sorry. So Instagram, I'm I'm on there much more, and then also emailing me through the contact form.
I will make sure I put all of your contact information in the details. I got you.
Yeah,
Of course.
I appreciate that.
Of course. So real quick before we close this episode out of the To the Feet podcast, is there any last words, anything you want to share before we wrap this up?
Be gentle with yourself. Life is a journey. And there's going to be ups and downs. So just be gentle with yourself.
Great way to wrap it up. Like I said earlier, I want to thank you so much, Mariposa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey. Yeah, I guess this will do it for this episode of the To the Feet podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day, all right?
Bye, guys.
All right, take it easy. Ciao.